So, the movie Star Trek Section 31 came out recently, and it's bad. Like, really bad. Not just a bad Star Trek movie, but a bad movie in general, as both fans and critics seem to agree. In the wake of this, a lot of Star Trek fans are finding it difficult to have a hopeful outlook for the franchise as a whole. I want to discuss my own thoughts on the subject. I'm not here to tell you everything that was wrong with the movie. Plenty of other people have already done a good job of that. How about this question? Was there anything actually good, let alone redeemable about the movie? Well, we got to see some species we haven't seen in a while, such as the Cameloids and Chironians. I like the idea of the Chironians not being extinct after all. It introduced a pretty neat non-humanoid species, the Nanokin. It was set in the time period between the original series and the Next Generation, which many Star Trek fans have been wanting to see more of. It featured Rachel Garrett, future captain of the Enterprise C, as a Section 31 agent. That's about it though. A question I think we're all asking is, why make a Star Trek movie like this? Section 31 itself was supposed to be a cautionary tale, testing the loyalties of characters who become caught up in its affairs such as Julian Bashir, Malcolm Reed, and Ash Tyler. Previous portrayals of Section 31 have shown them doing reprehensible things such as attempting genocide of the Founders, and being responsible for disasters such as the Control Incident, which threatened all sentient life in the galaxy. It seems very antithetical to make a movie that features agents of Section 31 as protagonists, let alone in a way that portrays them as heroes. People have noted that this seems to signal a sort of creep towards conservatism in the Star Trek franchise. This first started to become prevalent in Star Trek Picard, which took on a significantly darker narrative than all other previous editions of Star Trek and did not seem as willing to embrace the utopian setting. Conservative Star Trek fans, which somehow do exist, seem to favor the militaristic aspects of Starfleet, and Paramount is probably trying to draw in more members of that kind of audience. Streaming services just kind of have an inherent goal of getting as many people as possible to sign up, and this is likely part of that scheme for Paramount Plus. Another thing I don't need to mention because it's both obvious and widely discussed is how this whole idea thoroughly misses the point of Star Trek. It also alienates their long-established and built-in Star Trek audience, so it isn't even really a net gain for them. I do want to talk about what this movie could have been. A movie about Starfleet intelligence, the agency responsible for collecting information, which actually handles matters legally and ethically, would still attract an audience. Very likely more of one than a movie about the most corrupt division of the Federation's activities. We've seen their operations in episodes like Deep Space Nine's Honor Among Thieves, where Chief O'Brien goes undercover. I understand that Michelle Yeoh being the star of this movie was a big deal, but you know what other character she played besides Emperor Georgiou who could have been the protagonist? Prime Universe Captain Philippa Georgiou of the USS Shenzhou. There's so much that we still don't know about her character since she was only prominently featured in 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. What did she mean when she said she had seen a life of loss but still chose hope? How did she know Sarek? And why did he trust her enough to mentor his daughter? How did she go about getting Saru into Starfleet when taking him from Kaminar was a violation of General Order 1, the name at the time for the Prime Directive? If we could have a series called Star Trek Picard, we could have a movie called Star Trek Philippa Georgiou or something similar. Captain Georgiou was one of the main reasons people were excited for Star Trek Discovery in the first place, from her being featured in its promotional material prior to the series premiere. A whole movie about her would attract that audience. So, is there hope for the Star Trek franchise from here on out? I actually believe so. for several reasons. For one, in an interview from around the time the first 2 seasons of Discovery were airing, head of the franchise Alex Kurtzman said that he and the other writers and showrunners considered fan response to be important, and seeing that response in real time would indicate when the writing should course correct. Let's hope he hasn't changed his mind about that since then. In the same way that Section 31 is meant to be a cautionary tale in-universe, maybe the negative response to this movie can be the same thing in real life. Furthermore, there have been multiple times in the past when people thought Star Trek couldn't or wouldn't continue, but then it did. When the original series was canceled, we still got the animated series and eventually the movies. Star Trek V: The Final Frontier is cited as having almost killed the franchise, but it didn't. I'd be pretty surprised if there weren't similar attitudes towards Star Trek Generations, but just 2 years after that movie we got Star Trek First Contact, one of the best films in the entire franchise. After Star Trek Enterprise was canceled, we got a theatrical film trilogy just 4 years later. When Paramount Plus canceled Star Trek Prodigy and removed it from their service, Netflix picked up the show and let its 2nd season be completed and aired. I understand that fans aren't solely concerned about no more Star Trek being made, but that everything that is made won't be worth watching or will be similarly antithetical to Star Trek's message. Let's take a look at what we know is coming. We will be getting at least 2 more seasons and therefore 20 more episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which has an overall optimistic tone comparable to that of the original series and The Next Generation, and its storytelling is mainly episodic as opposed to serialized. There's the new Starfleet Academy series, and since this one is about young adults preparing for their future, it wouldn't make much sense for it not to have a hopeful tone, especially since it's reportedly trying to attract a young adult audience. Then there's the as-of-yet untitled comedy series to be created and helmed by Tawny Newsome, which is said to be set in the 25th century on a resort world similar to Risa. This probably means that there won't be as much of a focus on Starfleet apart from any officers visiting that world as tourists, but I'm sure a lot of people are interested in seeing the Star Trek universe from the perspective of civilians. I know I am. Plus, Tawny Newsome is extremely passionate and knowledgeable about Star Trek as a whole, and she absolutely understands its true vision. I think she should be in charge of the whole franchise instead of Alex Kurtzman, and who knows, maybe she'll take over for him someday when he decides he's done. There's also been talk about that Star Trek Legacy series that's supposed to be a spin-off of Star Trek Picard, and will therefore presumably have a similar tone to Picard, but at this point it's hard to know if that one will ever be made, at least anytime soon. I also want to pitch some of my own ideas for potential Star Trek series, if only to demonstrate that there are still so many possibilities for new Star Trek media. Hire me, Paramount! First is Star Trek: A New Federation, which would be set around 20 to 30 years after the United Federation of Planets was founded. Then there's a series taking place in the early to mid 24th century that I'd call Star Trek Hyperion. The 25th century could see a return to exploration of the Gamma Quadrant in a series that I would aptly name Star Trek Gamma Quadrant. If we wanted to focus on Federation space instead, I'd have a series about and named after a ship called the Sonata, which I would want to include a season-long arc about abolishing Section 31. There could be a series about returning to the Delta Quadrant, both the parts of it that Voyager explored and beyond. It could simply be called Star Trek Delta Quadrant, or something like Star Trek Distant Delta. I've also thought of a series called something like Star Trek Expansion or Star Trek Integration, set in the 20th 27th or 28th century about a ship whose primary purpose is diplomatic missions and would include stories about the Kelpians and Baul forming an alliance and the Vulcans' reunification with the Romulans. Finally, a series could be set around the 29th to 31st centuries, chronicling the temporal Cold War and all the factions involved in it, as well as how the conclusion was reached that all time travel technology must be destroyed and outlawed. Maybe there could even be a series exploring the fallout and 120-year aftermath of the burn. What I'm saying is, there's still plenty of hope and potential for Star Trek. As for Section 31 being part of the story, it hasn't been mentioned in the 32nd century as of yet, so for all we know it was abolished in the 800 years between Star Trek Picard and Season 3 of Discovery. Even if it was just that it stopped operating after everything fell apart due to the burn, I'll take it. And they better not start back up again with the reformation of the Federation. Discovery and Lower Decks being cancelled and not knowing if we're getting any more of Prodigy is hard and unfortunate, not to mention this latest movie, but as I've discussed, I think there's still good reason to be optimistic for Star Trek. Let's just hope that the people currently in charge listen and get the message, and that Alex Kurtzman doesn't turn out to be just as bad as Rick Berman was. Anyway, what do you think of everything I talked about in this video? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. I've made others on Star Trek and there will be more to come, so subscribe to keep up to date with my uploads. Live long and prosper, and I'll see you next time.